The interview room was sterile, bright lights, glass walls, and cold metal chairs that did little to soften the atmosphere. At the far end of the table, 3 panelists in sharp suits skimmed the resume of the woman sitting before them. She wore a simple beige blouse, black slacks, and shoes that had seen more practical days than fashionable ones. Her hair was tied neatly, her posture confident but gentle. Her name was Ala, and she had been waiting for this opportunity. She answered each technical question calmly. She described her coding experience, her years working with startups, the late nights debugging systems. She knew she was not flashy. She did not drop buzzwords or boast about venture capital circles. She just spoke with quiet expertise. But the panel exchanged looks, thin, almost imperceptible smirks. One of them leaned forward. "You seem competent. But frankly, this is a fast-paced tech firm. We need someone who not only fits the culture, but looks the part." Ala blinked. "Looks the part? You know, someone who brings presence, style. Clients and investors expect a certain polish." She understood the subtext. They had made up their minds the moment she walked in, before she even spoke. Her simplicity had spoken louder than her skills. "We'll keep your resume on file," another panelist said with a rehearsed smile. "But we're looking for someone more dynamic." She stood, gathered her folder, and thanked them politely.
Ow.
No bitterness, no scene, but what they did not know, what no one in that room knew, was who she was married to. And as Ayla stepped into the elevator, she sent a brief text. They said no. Her husband's reply was immediate. "Understood. I'll handle it." And in less than an hour, everything about that company was going to change. Ala stepped out of the towering glass building, the city skyline stretching wide around her. She was calm for someone who had just been dismissed for looking too simple. She knew better than to take it personally. She had faced this before, people mistaking simplicity for inadequacy. But this time, there was something different, because her husband had promised to handle it. And when he said that, it was never just words. Less than 30 minutes later, the sleek black sedan arrived outside the firm's corporate headquarters. The man who stepped out wore a tailored suit, sharp but understated. His name was Kian Nur. The tech industry knew him as the quiet billionaire investor, one who did not make public appearances often, but whose name carried weight in every boardroom. When the receptionist saw him approaching, she nearly stumbled over her greeting. "Sir, do you have an appointment?" He smiled faintly. "I believe they'll want to see me." Within minutes, the news had spread up the building. The CEO himself rushed down to the lobby, adjusting his tie in a hurry. "Mr. Nur, we didn't expect." "I know," Kian replied smoothly. "I am here because you declined a candidate this morning." The CEO's face stiffened. "I'm not sure I understand." Kian's expression didn't change. "Ala Nur, my wife."
Ow.
The CEO's jaw slackened, his mind racing. He replayed the morning interview, the woman in the beige blouse, the polite smile, the same woman they had dismissed without a second thought. Before the CEO could offer a word of apology, Kian spoke again, his voice calm but absolute. "I was considering acquiring this firm for its promising IP and talent. But today, I realized it's lacking in both, because if your team can't recognize brilliance when it's sitting right in front of them, then your leadership is flawed." The CEO swallowed hard. "I assure you we can," but Kian held up a hand. "You'll get the papers by the end of the day. I am buying this company, effective immediately." The CEO stood frozen, realizing too late that the decision had already been made. And upstairs, in the interview room, the panelists who had dismissed Ayla were about to learn that the simple woman they overlooked was now the wife of the man who owned them. Upstairs, the panelists continued sifting through applications, oblivious to the storm brewing just floors below. They joked quietly among themselves about Ali, the woman with the plain look, who had interviewed well but lacked sparkle. To them, she was already forgotten, just another name on a discarded resume, until the CEO burst into the room. His face was pale, his forehead dotted with sweat. The room fell silent instantly. "We have a situation," he said, voice tight. "Mr. Kian Nur is acquiring the company, effective immediately." The panelists exchanged stunned glances. "Wait, the Kian Nur? The billionaire investor?" One of them stammered. "Yes," the CEO snapped. "And the candidate you rejected this morning, the woman you thought didn't fit, is his wife." The words hit like a thunderclap. The smug smiles evaporated. The color drained from their faces as they replayed the interview in their minds. Every dismissive word, every condescending smile, every overlooked answer. They had not just rejected a candidate, they had insulted the woman who now stood one Step away from owning their future? What? What do we do? One whispered. The CEO shook his head. There's nothing to do. The deal is already happening. The room was heavy with dread, not just fear of losing their jobs, but the deeper shame of realizing they had judged competence by appearance, not merit. Downstairs, Keon's legal team was already filing the paperwork. He stood by the window, his phone buzzing quietly. Ayla's message lit up his screen. No need to push them out. Let them stay. Let them see what real leadership looks like. Keon smiled to himself. His wife was always graceful. She did not need revenge. She wanted change, and she was about to get IDIA because soon, the simple woman they had overlooked would be sitting at the head of the boardroom by the end of the week. The acquisition was official. The company's logo remained the same, but everything else changed, starting with the boardroom. Alla walked through the familiar glass doors, not as an applicant, but as a partner to the new owner. The executives stood when she entered, their earlier arrogance replaced with awkward smiles and darting eyes. The very same panelists who once doubted her now shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Alla wore no power suit, now no designer heels, just the same quiet dignity, a crisp white blouse, and her unshakable presence. She did not gloat. She did not scold. She simply sat at the table, looked each person in the eye, and said, "Let's talk about talent." The room remained still. I was turned away because I didn't look the part. She continued softly, because I wasn't dressed the way you expected. But you didn't ask about my ideas, my vision, my strategy for scaling your flawed systems. One of the panelists fumbled with his pen. We made a mistake. She smiled gently. Yes, but mistakes can be corrected. Keon joined her at the table, his gaze firm. We're not here to replace you. We're here to show you what leadership looks like when it's not clouded by bias. Alla then pulled out her proposal, the very plan she had prepared for her. Interview, the one they never gave her time to present. She laid it out in detail. New product pipelines, efficiency models, innovative integrations. The executives watched in silence, realizing that not only was she qualified, she was the most prepared mind in the room. When she finished, she stood gracefully and said, "We will elevate this company. But it starts by seeing people for their worth, not their wardrobe." And with that, she walked out, leaving them to sit with the weight of every wrong assumption they had made in the days that followed. The company's culture began to shift because Alla made sure of it. She wasn't interested in superficial change. She created new hiring protocols designed to identify real talent, regardless of appearance, background, or social polish. Every applicant was evaluated on problem-solving tests, creativity, and integrity, not their designer shoes or glossy resumes. She personally oversaw these revisions, ensuring no one else would ever be rejected the way she was. Meanwhile, word of the acquisition spread beyond the walls of the firm. News outlets picked up the story not because a billionaire had bought another company, but because of why. Headlines praised the simple woman who was overlooked by corporate arrogance, only to end up shaping the company's future. Former employees, interns, and candidates who had once been dismissed started writing in. They shared their stories of rejection, of being ignored for not fitting the corporate mold. Alla read every single one. She invited some of them back. They weren't just applicants now, they were consultants. Innovators, contributors to a new era of leadership built on inclusion and merit. As for the executives who had once sneered at her, she didn't fire them. Instead, she made them learn. Every week, they sat in training sessions led by experts on unconscious bias, innovation, and modern leadership. They attended, humbled and quiet, realizing the seats they once occupied so confidently could have been filled by minds far greater than their own. In the center of it all stood Elena, just the wife of the owner, but the architect of the company's rebirth. She had walked into the building as an outsider. Now, she was the reason it was still standing. Months later, the company was unrecognizable in the best way. Productivity had soared. Innovation returned to the forefront. Employees who once felt overlooked were now leading projects, their ideas funded and celebrated. The boardroom that once judged by appearances had become a place where only ideas spoke the loudest. AILA didn't take a formal executive title. She didn't need one. Her influence was felt in every decision, every meeting, every innovation. That took root. She continued visiting the office quietly, engaging with teams, mentoring young developers who reminded her of herself brilliant, yet underestimated. One afternoon, as she walked through the newly renovated campus, a junior engineer caught up to her. She was young, nervous, but determined. "Mrs. Nur," she said, Thank you for what you've done here. I was almost ready to give up on tech, but now I see people like me being heard. Dalla smiled gently. Promise me something when it's your turn to lead. Don't forget how this feels. The young woman nodded, her eyes bright with hope. Back in his office, Kian watched his wife through the glass, pride softening his usually stern expression. She didn't just change a company, she changed a culture. She reminded them all that brilliance isn't worn on the surface. It lives in patience, in perseverance, in quiet certainty. The executives who once dismissed her, they never made that mistake again. They learned the hard way that power isn't always loud. Sometimes it walks in wearing a beige blouse, armed with brilliance and dignity. And that was how Ayla, the woman they said wasn't dynamic enough, became the heartbeat of a company she was once told she didn't fit. Because in the end, real value can't be judged by appearance. It reveals itself when the world finally learns to look deeper.